Education through the Orthodox Christian Network. My name is Michael Haldis, and this is a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George here in Bethesda, Maryland. This is week 2 of our 2023-2024 education year. And just to be deferential to people that may join the first time or watch this, our theme this year are icons, Christ, and life. And we're really taking a deeper dive into what it really means to understand the reality iconographically. Obviously, we're focusing on icons themselves as a launching point, but really try to, very much like you may, for those of you that watch often, very much like you may be used to hearing in this room about our sacramental understanding of reality. We're just coming at it a little bit different way this year. So just as so today, actually, what we're talking about is icons, their creation and depth of meaning. Before I get into that, just as a quick recap for some of the things we went over last week, we focused on the Seventh Ecumenical Council to launch our discussion, which was really about the restoration of icons. And we talked about the previous 6 ecumenical councils, which, if you had to summarize them at a high level, were really about establishing or reestablishing or defending the understanding of the divine and human nature of Christ and Holy Spirit as a person of the Trinity. And then we pointed out that the Seventh Ecumenical Council may have seemed like an anomaly compared to the other 6, but we talked about what was really being defended there wasn't just the use of icons in veneration and worship. It was a defense, again, of the nature of reality. The holiness of matter was at stake. That, I postulate, occurs today. We have a dichotomous culture we live in of the sacred and the secular. Our entire faith was formed at a time, the church was formed at a time where there was no division of sacred and secular. There might have been sacred and profane, but it was all understood. Reality was all understood. It wasn't a question that God did not exist. It was a question of, were you faithful to God, right? So it's a different culture. And what we were talking about is how pervasive this sacred secular, this lack of understanding of the holiness of matter pervades our thinking. We talked about things like the second coming, which, when you think about it, makes no sense, right? If Christ is in our midst, and he is and always shall be, where's he returning from? He never went anyplace, right? But our understanding, our cultural forces kind of bleed into this type of thinking where we create these false dichotomies. So we talked a lot about those things, and we went on and on. So that's just to kind of set the stage. I know some of you weren't here last week, but also for those that may be tuning in for the first time. So today, where we're going to go is, let me just continue on this thread a little bit. So this false notion that we're going to try to shatter throughout the year with everything. Orthodox author John McGuckin talked about the sacred and secular differentiation. He says it creates a hopelessly misguided theology and a corrupt form of Christianity. Very strong words. Author Andrew Williams, Orthodox author, says, we are body, mind, spirit unity. Everything we do with our bodies affects our spiritual reality. Everything we do with our minds affects our spiritual reality. So again, we want to make sure that we understand. We may use terms like body, soul, spiritual, material, but it's all one thing. We just use words to try to, put it into our rational thinking in a way that we can understand it. So before I get into the lesson proper, I did come across this quote that I wanted to share. I wish I had come across it last week, but, God's timing in all things. So it reads like this. In the inverted world of modernity, ideas are considered spiritually real, while actions and rituals are somehow suspect. Used to be just the opposite. The modern understanding, in which material efforts are subordinate to mental ones, reveals a very fundamental change in how our relationship with God and God's relationship to the world is perceived. What our thoughts betray is a deep disconnect between the material world and the world of our thoughts. Ideas, with all their abstract qualities, are seen as the stuff of reality, while material things are somehow superficial and devoid of content. What matters for us is not matter itself, but the ideas that we associate it with. Thus, nothing has any inherent meaning, only imputed meaning. Things are valuable and important because we think they are. This creates an inner disconnect. We imagine that we live in a material world of inert, meaningless objects. Their worth, their value, their association with good and evil are completely dependent on our thoughts. As such, the entire universe depends on what we think about it. It's little wonder that we stand on the edge of existential abyss. One false thought and the universe passes into oblivion. This is my favorite guy, Father Stephen Freeman, by the way. So this disconnect is what I think, if you had this continuum of the iconographic on this side all the way over to the pornographic, and I don't mean just like sexual stuff, I mean a debased way of treating people and things. And this disconnect and how we navigate through it is where we are on this continuum of understanding, so to speak. And that's why beginning this year, talking about the council and talking about the physical icons is a good place to start establishing a better baseline of how we understand reality. So let me stop there for a moment. Have I lost anybody?
So, Michael, you haven't lost me, but if I can ask just a quick 1 minute synopsis, because I wasn't here last week.
Yeah.
What is your understanding of why the iconoclastic movement began? Like, why in the 7th century did all of a sudden the Orthodox Church question iconography?
Because of, well, it's a complicated answer, but let me.
One minute.
Yeah.
So I don't eat up everyone's time.
Yeah. There are a couple of reasons. There were some outside pressures of the culture where Muslim influence and Jewish influence at the time and how they worshipped, and their
depiction of God.
Right. There was that, but here's the sad thing. It found all too receptive of an audience within the church. It found an all too receptive audience within the church that bought into these external influences that denigrated icons and saw them as part of idolatry. And it's a good question, John. It's worth repeating. And what we talked about too, if any of you are familiar with the works of Father Alexander Schmemann, okay, Father Schmemann pointed out that the heresy of secularism is really the only heresy that has grown out from inside the church, not outside of it, because from the beginning of the formation of the church, there were the Gnostics, there were all kinds of other groups that were already influenced by, or not, maybe not influenced, but lined up very similar to like with Platonic thought about like the expression, the idea is the expression of the true reality, things like that. I probably botched that, but the point being was this negativity towards the physical, as if the spiritual was really superior, right? And so that's just really part of our human nature that manifests in different forms. So that's really why the reason it was so easy to be misunderstood. But thank God, luckily, we got to thank the women here. It was Empress Irene and Empress Theodora, right? The emperors bought in. These were the two that led from a political or level, if you will. These were the two that championed the iconodules or iconodules and the iconophiles, right? And actually, that's what we celebrate. We celebrate Sunday of Orthodoxy is not the result of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. It was what happened 120 years later, 843. So I know it's more than 60 seconds, but
that's great. No, thank you very much. Just a quick recap, so I feel somewhat caught up here.
Right. So let's get into icons themselves. So I talked about, one of the things we ended with last week was talking about iconographers themselves. And we had this whole discussion about why icons are not just art. So I guess the first question I want to throw out to everybody to get a discussion going or further to discussion is what qualifies someone to be an iconographer? Can anyone of us sit down and just do an icon? Write an icon or paint an icon? People get hung up on that. You can actually use either phrase, write an icon or paint an icon. It doesn't,
No, but don't you have to study it under either an iconographer or there's an ecclesiastical hierarchy here? You're like permitted by the church to be an iconographer. and there's a certain obviously style that must be adhered to.
Yes.
But I'm not allowed. I mean, I can pretend I'm writing an icon, but no church will accept it. However masterful it is, it's not acceptable if it comes from this hand at this time, because I don't have, what do you want to call it, the credential,
Right.
the recognition by the church that I'm spiritually educated and prepared to try to portray Christ or the saints or some scriptural passage on wood. Or
Yeah,
whatever medium.
and you're hitting on something even deeper. Absolutely. I mean, first of all, you have to have ability. You have to have artistic ability. I mean, everything we do in the church is, and what I'm about to say isn't meant to exclude anybody, but we try to bring the highest quality to it. We want our choir to be people that can actually sing, right? We want our teachers to be people that can actually teach. We want our priests to be, and nothing's wrong with that. It doesn't mean that it's not meant to exclude anybody. But so the same thing with an iconographer, it has to be somebody that has ability, has artistic ability. But of course, it's not relegated just to ability. So to what you just said, all true. It's and I'm going to quote Metropolitan Callisto's Ware. It's because the icon is part of a part of tradition with a capital T. Icon painters are not free to adapt or innovate as they please, for their work must reflect not their own aesthetic sentiments, but the mind of the church. Mm-hmm. So what this gets to is they have to have the phronema, right? And we get back to that word, the phronema. Hey, Boris. Which is the mind of Christ. And how do you do that? Well, it's for each one of us, it's unique in the sense of the uniqueness of who we are, but it's being sacramentally sound. It's participating in the life of the church, in the vocation and role that you're called to participate in. And then, of course, what's really important is the sacraments themselves, primarily the Eucharist and what else? Sacrament of?
There's a bunch of them.
Right. Confession, repentance.
Oh, okay.
Because humility and thankfulness. Humility and thankfulness. Eucharistol, Eucharist is all about that. We offer ourselves in thanks, we receive in thanks, but what gets lost is the sacrament of repentance, because, well, talk about misconstruing it. We often believe, I got to go there and tell somebody all the bad stuff about myself, where it's, a repentant life is not so much calling to mind all the bad things. It's a change. It's a change in behavior. You're repentant when your behavior changes. The journey may be that you confess it quite a bit and you struggle, but at some point, the thing you're struggling with, when the behavior is changed, that's when you've achieved repentance. And the joy of it is, along the way, you have the grace of Christ as you struggle. So it's not being, quote unquote, held against you in a legalistic framework, right? So, and so those two things are really important for the phronema, to acquire the mind of Christ, to participate in the sacraments at that level with that understanding. And it also ties into something we spoke about last week. I think we spoke about it here. Maybe it's a conversation I had. Oh, yeah, we talked about how often we might come to church and we may say to ourselves, I didn't get anything out of that. I didn't feel anything, right? And we may equate our faith to an emotion, where our faith is really an action, right? It's always about the action we take. It's faithfulness. And so Christ didn't say, think this in remembrance of me, or feel this. He said, do this. Right. Whoever puts my words into action. So the culture of today makes us always think it's about what we think or feel. And so if I don't have a moving moment of revelation and understanding, I'm not getting it. And that's not it at all. And that's why this understanding, getting down to the basics of the physicality and material holiness of matter, helps us remember. It helps us, at least me, it helps me combat some of this false thinking that leads us into a wrong direction. Make sense? Yeah.
I liken it to the whole issue of marital vows.
Yeah.
Where in the Orthodox Church, of course, you don't say a word. You're there to be married. Pass it around, please. Before God. Whereas, of course, here you have a lot of people who make vows. I'll make you beautiful strawberry shakes until our dying day and whatnot. And it's kind of a shock to
Okay, yeah.
people who are not of the Orthodox
Right.
faith to know that you're just there basically to have God bless your sacrament of holy matrimony, not to espouse anything yourself.
Or to make up vows, right?
So I'm saying, yeah.
Or to remind us men, it's good to stay silent as we move forward.
But we live in a self-validating
Yeah.
culture.
Exactly. That's a great point. It's self-validating, and everything we talk about is always about, changing the focus from here to here. And also, yeah, I'll stop there. I don't want to I have a tendency sometimes to bring in too many threads. So I don't want to go far afield. Yeah, but that self-validation is so strong. It's nothing new. I mean, we don't live in a time where this is all new. It's just the expression of these falsehoods in this particular time may be exacerbated by the technology of the day or whatever. But none of this is new.
But it is more pronounced. It's more pronounced today than it was 50 years ago and 100 years ago, maybe through technology, maybe through information and communication systems. But I don't think our American culture was like this in the 17 or 1800s. It's certainly become that way since the last 50, 60
Yeah,
years.
I mean,
That's a larger discussion.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I don't think this happened because somebody flicked a switch. I think this is a gradual.
No, it's a progression, and
Yeah.
really smart people that have studied these issues in depth could probably fascinate us by showing us the thread.
Education to a large degree, yes.
And that we 50 years ago.
Excuse me, 1 minute.
You wouldn't be thinking about is there life on Mars?
It gets too cold.
And how big the universe is.
Go ahead and put in the air conditioner.
Maybe 50,000 planets that are Earth-type planets that are out there. Are we alone? All of that education and all that thinking, comes into play when you're talking about religion.
Right.
It's also it's a modality of education too. Education was more formational at one point, formation of your character. Now it's about just facts, cognition, how much, how much you can amass about a particular subject makes you educated, right? I have to laugh sometimes, and I love it. Our Orthodox biblical scholars will always say, "Don't go into biblical scholarship," because it's digressed into something where so much about something that few people care about, and it's not always contextualized in how it applies to the common person. For example, the Bible itself. I mean, we have the printed Bible now. We study it, we read it. The Bible came out of liturgy. It was used. What the basis for how the Bible was formed was what books were being read and were part of the liturgical expression of the churches. So it's really impossible to understand the scriptures in depth without participating liturgically with them, right? I mean, anybody can study and read, and you can have a high IQ and be brilliant and read and study and all that stuff. But it doesn't mean you're going to know about it, but you're not going to know, right? And that's the other thing. The modern education system there's no revelation is considered just your whimsy, right? No one trusts that someone had revelation of a truth. I mean, but that's ultimately what we believe because the Holy Fathers had that, and of course it was validated by the experience of others, right? It wasn't just alone.
The education system now
Yeah.
is to develop a marketable skill.
Yeah.
And it's all about that marketable skill.
As if that's the end all be all. And I would tie it, hey, Elizabeth, this is going to sound like I'm trying to force fit into the discussion, but it's not, because it also, I mean, we ourselves sometimes, even as parents, right, we're very concerned about these marketable skills, right? Even maybe sometimes at the expense of the character formation, right? Do we make choices where we send our kids all the time based on, like the classic one is, one of the classic factors of Orthodox attrition is parents that choose to send their children to schools where there's no Orthodox church nearby. So how do you continue in the faith if you're not participating? Faith isn't thoughts or feelings, it's the participation. I'm guilty of that. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not busting on anybody. So, and by the way, most of what I share, I'm guilty of. So just to be clear, I don't have any type of superiority. But I mean, these because it's just the way the models are today.
Yeah, I two things I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Number one, and I'm not sure if it makes any distinction between what has just been said. But knowing facts is no longer very important to employers anymore. Soft skills, problem solving, working collaboratively and peacefully with people is something that employers, like even in the ICT world, like computer technology, are really looking for. I just came back from Egypt, and that's the complaint that I always heard. The universities there just teach facts and theory, and they don't, students don't learn how to work with each other.
I agree with you, Nick. I actually think a lot of corporations are really smart because they understand some of these things. Like, that's why they gobble up. People always think you have to be a STEM kid to make it, but they gobble up liberal arts people for critical thinking, for the personnel. I mean, it's not the end of the world.
And I have number two, and I was ecstatic when I heard this. My daughter got accepted, thank God, to William and Mary College, and they don't have a Greek club there. They have an Orthodox Christian fellowship.
Yes, they do.
And the people there are just so wonderful. They volunteer. If you want to go to the American Orthodox Church, well, we go down to Newport News. I think if you want to go to the Greek one, we have a ride taking you over to the Greek church in Williamsburg, and they have community events. And the focus is more on Orthodoxy, not can I Greek dance and talk about all the time. Anyway, so
no, I'm familiar with some of the churches and some of the priests, and they do a good job of what you just said. So, okay. So let me get back to what we were talking about. This is a really good discussion in terms of the iconographer and also beyond what he or she needs to be quote unquote qualified. And part of the understanding, the phronema that they bring, is a keen understanding of image and likeness. Icon means, it's the Greek word, right? Image translated is
Icona.
yeah.
Icona.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll throw this out. You probably won't qualify. But is there a difference between image and likeness? When God,
In the cherubic hymn, we say iconizondes. We are the images of the cherubs, right?
Yep.
It's not we're like them or pretend to be them.
Genesis 1:26, when it reads, "And God made man as in human, in His image and likeness." Are they interchangeable terms, or do they mean something different?
A representation could be anything. I can say this cup represents me. It's not my image, though, right? So I have to say that there's a distinction there. Something more profound.
So are we saying that the depiction physically is one thing, but the deeper meaning behind that individual?
Kind of.
All right, and what that saint represents and what we're striving to accomplish in our own life.
Yes.
That saint represented.
Yep. You're hitting on the thread. Elizabeth, you look like you were going to say something.
I was wondering, is it behavior? The image is the physical, or the likeness is the essence, right?
Yeah. So I think let me say what I'm getting at, and we can see if we tie these threads together. So most of the Holy Fathers, not all, but most, believe there were two different things. St. John of Damascus said the expression, as an example, the expression according to the image indicates rationality and freedom, while the expression according to the likeness indicates assimilation to God through virtue. So the distinction, let me boil it down a little bit, in how time. Remember we talked about holiness of matter and deification and theosis, and the saints, the relics of the saints are, these are people that have been closer to this deification. That's how we understand salvation than us per se. Hopefully not all of, maybe one of you guys one day. But so image is what we're given. The likeness is what we achieve through our journey through our union with Christ, becoming more Christ-like, right? So that's really the distinction. One is what, like I said, one is what, we're given the image of God. We can grow into His likeness. Man became God so that God might become man, St. Athanasius. That's what that's about. And that's how we as Orthodox understand salvation. It's not a one-time acceptance of a cognitive acceptance of Christ. It's more of a journey throughout our lives to become more and more Christ-like, as expressed in the faith through faithfulness, but and that's what the phronema is we acquire more of the mindset of Christ. We become more like Christ.
It's our action and our behavior that helps us draw nearer to God.
Yeah, it's the choices we make that, we draw nearer to God and we acquire more of the holiness. That's why Saint Seraph of Sarov said, acquire the Holy Spirit, and you'll save thousands around you. Go ahead. There's two hands. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, is that with the saints, they were all sinners, the same as us.
Mhm.
So we already have something in common with the saints
Yes.
to make that journey seem possible.
Absolutely. We all have the same image, right? We're all given the image. It's just the saints were those that just progressed further, so to speak. That's why there are examples of the saints. But they're not. That's why we venerate the saints, right? We admire the saints because that's who we want to be like. That's our goal. And we all probably have different saints that we really identify with. That's why it's important, perhaps maybe in your as you pray about that, which saint you tell your friend,
Who's James?
Yeah.
I was going to ask
Yeah.
or state, what's interesting is, and this is probably another one of these great Orthodox lost in translation issues, but we keep using terminology like image and likeness. What you explain are very non-visual concepts.
Mm-hmm.
That we're using visual terminology.
Mhm.
When we talk about iconography, and yet what you just described by St. John Damascus or whichever the fathers, in terms of the relationship with God, has nothing to do with a visual representation of God, obviously, or anything along those lines. And I think that's what makes this sometimes a difficult issue to grapple with because of our poor terminology and understanding these concepts
Yeah, because we're really not talking about anything to do
with an image or a likeness as we use them in our everyday.
right.
Yes.
But yet the tangible things of the faith is what helps us get to this place, right? So like things like icons are things we can see visually, things we can experience, although they're there because they help us grow to this place that's not based on what you just said.
Mhm.
So it's kind of I don't know if it's paradox, but it's kind of, it makes, the language is always, language and terms are always both enlightening, but also potential barriers to our understanding. Well, the other thing too, we have to I shouldn't say I know myself, what I try to remind myself is don't fall into a reductionist mindset. We talk about self-focus and self-validating. We like to reduce everything to a nice, comfortable place where we can wrap our mind around it, as opposed to just accepting, heaven and hell is a classic example. Most conceptions of heaven are wrong, right? It's all, of eternity is a continuation of this life in a higher form. It's a radically different thing that we don't have language for. We just have glimpses of it through Christ himself with his transformation and his resurrection. But it's not a continuation of this life. It's not going to a place. It's the restoration of things of how they're supposed to be, right? Yeah.
And, do you think the decision about iconography was also based on the level of education that the masses had at that point in time? There wasn't a lot of books, there was a lot of reading, and a lot of scholastic,
Mm-hmm.
and that it was a way of telling visiting the Bible and the stuff of the Bible. I think that had an influence in the decisions about iconography.
I'm sure it did. I haven't studied the matter in depth historically to give you a definitive answer, but I do know, first of all, we know that literacy levels literally weren't really a thing until recently, right? And even if you were literate, you wouldn't have access to a book until the printing press. because just
There
for
were no printing presses in
right,
1800.
right. But I'm saying previous to the whenever it was invented, where I
Yeah.
forget when was it Gutenheim or whatever,
Gutenberg.
Gutenberg, yeah, press. Yeah. So a lot of the worship experience was based on visual, right? And so that's why it was a fierce debate. But again, there were some that just didn't in there. It's almost later on we could attach it to what we think of as a puritanical mindset, but that type of mindset was alive and well in terms of how we misconstrued idolatry, right?
Well, it must have been. I mean, it must have been quite fanatical to get rid of icons. And,
Mhm.
I mean, there's a certain icon called Golika Filusa, the sweet kiss.
Mhm.
And, the way it was saved was, this aristocrat, she had it. The story goes, she threw it into the Sea of Marmara to save it. Somehow it made its way to Mount Athos, and that's where it landed. But
Well,
just the story of like trying to save something and throwing it away.
see, it has. Let me think. I want to make sure I don't sound like I'm. But it has its roots. Even being receptive to the thought of an icon as an idol has its roots in a misunderstanding of the incarnation of Christ. Because Christ becoming a human being sanctified matter, right? Everything he did sanctified the material world. So to then say simply because it's a visual thing that it's therefore idolatrous shows that you don't, there's certain there could be things like you could make something physical an idol for sure, right? I mean, we do that today, or through how we objectify people, how we objectify things, even the careless way we throw around language. Oh, he or she is an icon. Some Hollywood star is an icon. I mean, we cheapen everything in this culture, right? Not everybody, but in general. So it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of that, and that's why the Seventh Ecumenical Council really related to the other six, because it was always about the affirmation of the divine and the human. Christ is 100% human and 100% divine, two natures, right? Not subordinate, and it was always that out of balance that where we run into the heretical thinking or misconstrued. And frankly, a lot of Christians today, the body is a prison for the soul. The material is a prison for the spiritual that must be released, right? Whereas we don't Christianity really doesn't believe that at all. Death is an aberration, a temporary separation. But we're always going to be. We understand that we as human beings are always in the context of embodiment, even though there's this temporary separation. Which a lot of people listen to that would think, like, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know your own journey, but was there ever a time where that surprised you, when you learned in Orthodoxy how we always believe completely in embodiment, that heaven, so to speak, is not going to be in place where we're disembodied? Just throwing it out there. There's another aspect of image and likeness that's incredibly important, because as for us in his image, we're all icons, right? We're like living human theology. This is why, again, if you need a reason other than Christ's words to remember to treat people well, this is maybe another way to think about it, that everybody's endowed with God's image, right? Even the scummiest person does not lose that image. They may be making choices to not grow in his likeness, but they're still, that's why God loves everybody so much, even people that choose evil, because they've received his image, right? And it's hard for us necessarily to love that way. And what is that image? Where does that image derive from? How do we understand God? Who is God? Probably not asking a really good question.
Our Father. I mean,
And who else? We just said the creed. Who do we affirm in the creed? Right, Trinitarian, right? So God is unity in diversity, and diversity within unity. So that's the image of God placed on us. Now, we don't act that way. we find the devil, the devil is the ultimate divider, right? And we fall into patterns of division all too easily. I mean, in this room, in this church, I mean, in our houses. I mean, we do. Let's face it. It's something that we need to constantly all be working on. It's the infection of sin, right? But the way this ties into icons to an extent is by being icons ourselves, right? Bearing the image, what we create also needs to flow from that understanding. So an iconographer should have this depth of understanding that prayerfully flows into their creation of the art of the icon, right? It's not just I'm a great artist and I know all the technicalities of, and we'll get into some of this time permitting, know the technicalities of what inverse perspective and flatness and all this stuff that I'll talk about today, but I'm kind of out of my depth on, I need a Byzantine iconographer in here, but we can talk the surface. It's more than just that. It's more than just that. It's this depth of understanding that then flows into the work. Very much, very similar to maybe what you experience when a priest who you find to be particularly holy does a liturgy, or things like that. The depth of that person's likeness, if you will, flows into the work, and so that's what is also important in terms of who should be creating the icons, because the icons are so much more than even what we like. I'm pointing to John's icon because he brought one in. If I had been a smart teacher, I would have brought one in too. But it's more than just what we even see. There's an experience of the icon which goes into how they're created.
Would you like a visual aid?
Huh?
Person?
Yeah, I might need one as I go through this. So let
I
me.
want to show your audience.
Yeah.
This
Like,
conversation made me understand why when we were in Greece, I watched an icon,
Mhm.
and on the back they had the mark of the church and so forth. And I never understood, why they did that. They did it because it was done by a professional
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Most of the icons I own, it never has the iconographer's name. It's on purpose.
Mhm.
It's not about who that person is.
They don't have.
Yeah.
They have a seal.
Yeah. This one is Holy Transfiguration Monastery. So there's a certain way on purpose that icons are made, are created. And so I'll just ask some questions and hopefully we'll get a discussion. So icons are flat and two-dimensional on purpose. So anybody want to speculate as to reasons why?
I would say it's because it's supposed to be, let's say, transcendent. It's not supposed to look like very humanistic, very sensual, maybe. It might be a word to use. It kind of give you another dimension of reality, or
Yeah, I mean, there's not one answer per se.
Yeah.
So this is
I have some icons in Greece, and they're overlaid with silver, so it's not flat. It's not like it was overlaid with silver, and one is St. George, and it's the horse and that, and overlaid.
Yeah, so there's an upraised quality to it. Yeah, but that's
and the one they got my name was overlaid again in silver, so it wasn't flat.
I would think that the icon, there's an icon underneath it, and then they adorn it with the silver, and that's what you're looking at. But that's, I mean, to me, that's not the real part of the icon. It's people, like if you go to Tino's and you see the icon of the Mother of God with Jesus, and I was a kid when I saw it, but I just remember it had like pearls and gems over it, and all you can see were the faces and the hands, but there's a real icon underneath it, and donors and worshipers came to adorn it, that way, like to dress it up that way.
if you were to do some research yourselves, you'd probably find many different good answers. So I'm just going to talk about, you're right. So it's really, so they're not three-dimensional on purpose, two-dimensional flat. So they're not self-contained. It's to draw you in to experience the icon. They're not meant to be self-contained. They're meant to, you're supposed to have a relationship, if you will. So when you, I don't know if any of you have a particular icon that has you experience. Like for me, it's the Pantocrator, the two different sides of Christ. His face looks a little bit different on either side.
Cover of your book.
Yeah, that's why I chose it, because there's something about that icon that, and I think this is false. Like some people say it's supposed to show the divine and the human. I don't think that's true, as I came to realize. But for me, it's an ever-present. Reminder is too light a word, but it does focus me on that reality. I get reminded of the reality of the divine and human nature of Christ and how we are created with human nature, and our job is to acquire more and more of the divine. So I have it. I stand before it when I pray in the morning, but it's in my office. And a lot of times what I'm doing in my office does not feel divine when I'm interacting with clients or whatnot, right? Especially if it's getting contentious or whatever. But because I'm surrounded by all these icons, and I always have to blur out my screen. So when I'm doing Zoom or Teams meetings, they're not seeing like, they're not going to say, oh, religious fanatic, right? Although they can Google me and they'll find out, so to speak. But it is an ever-present reminder. It's more, I use the word reminder because I can't think of a word, but it's the experience of that. It's that palpable experience of Christ. And when I have been in things where I'm feeling, combative, or I'm feeling contentious, I'm reminded, I really am, I'm reminded of the truth that everybody bears the image of God. And it's really blasphemous for me to maybe react to that person's behavior, treat them a certain way, ascribe motive to them when I really don't know, things like that. So that's, these are what icons, these are the things that icons do for us. They're part of our living prayer life, our living. They're not just, granted, look, sometimes we just look at them and say, that's a nice looking icon, right? We all get that way, but that's not their purpose, obviously. So the flatness and the two-dimensionality of it are just one aspect of the icon that's supposed to draw us into that relational experience. So that, can anybody relate to what I just said?
No, absolutely.
Okay. Make sure I'm not out in left field. And the other thing that that's important with the flatness is, well, I think I kind of just explained it. It's sometimes, and there's also a certain perspective within the flatness of the icon where people are often, thanks, Philip, thanks for coming, where people are not necessarily shown in a way that's realistic in terms of how, like a photo would be. So we took a photo of this room, like you're in the back and you're in the front, right? There's a different perspective. It doesn't share that. Often the perspective is the same for all. Again, there's meaning in that, and there's teaching in that. And so there's also, well, maybe I just kind of said that. There's also what's called in the icon a multi-view perspective. Does anybody know what that is? Think of the icon of the Ascension. This is a classic example. The multi-view perspective in that is, if you really look at it, you really can't tell if Christ is coming or going. And that's on purpose.
How would you be able to tell in a still representation either way?
Well, he'd probably be up closer to the top.
Okay.
So
you're saying that there's an orthodox meaning to that lack of clarity? Are we supposed to understand there's a part of it that's...
Yeah, it gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that, that particular icon is deliberate in terms of not depicting it, whether he's coming or going, because he never left. We say the second coming, we keep but he never left. If we say Christ is in our midst, he is and always shall be. And he says in Matthew 28:20, lo, I am with you always. Are you going to contradict him?
No,
Okay.
I will not, all right? But can I raise a point?
You may.
The second coming represents, I've been led to believe, or I've let myself believe, I won't blame anyone else, the physical manifestation of Christ, the way he walked on earth 2,000 years ago, that's the second coming. So yes, he is with us at all times, he fills all places, fills all things, but he's not physically with us, is my understanding. He is spiritually and every other way that we may not even conceive of, but physically he is not sitting here in a chair with us, whereas 2,000 years ago he would have been sitting here in a chair. So isn't that
That's correct.
the second coming?
Yeah, right. But
Okay.
often the second coming is experienced by a lot of people that he's gone away. Heaven is up there, we're down here.
I
That
see
that
what
kind
you're
of
saying.
it
Okay.
creates a false understanding as
Right.
opposed to the correct understanding. Yes, he came in a certain way,
Mhm.
in a very natural way, being birthed.
Yes.
He's going to come as he left, as the scriptures tell us, and we're going to experience him differently than we do now. But he's never gone, right? It's like
Okay.
think of right now, we're not with our spouses. They're not physically in this room, but they haven't left per se. They're still in our reality, right? I mean, it's not a great analogy, but you see what I'm saying? It's not, it's something like that. So what you just articulated isn't always the understanding, or even if it is, it's not always lived that way. It's always like
Yeah,
he's
I
gone.
get it.
See what I'm saying? And,
Mhm.
that's what we were saying about last
Right.
week. This kind of stuff creeps into our thinking,
Mhm.
and then consciously or unconsciously motivates. It's a source of our actions, or a source of our thinking, right? I mean,
No, I
Yeah.
get it.
no, but I'm just thinking how, and the icons. When your home is surrounded, if you have all kinds of icons in your home, um, hopefully it's reminding you of the present. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but Father Frank Marangos told the story years ago where a couple entering into relations would cover the icons in the room as if they're being watched. I mean, we can take it to a point of being a little silly, but the point is, in some respects, like, yes, it's, God is present always in all things, right? He told that story in an open forum, so I felt safe that I could tell it. But
That's another class, Michael, right? Yeah.
I don't know that I'm qualified to teach that class.
Yeah. The sacredness of holy matrimony. That's
Yeah.
another class.
Well, we're
next
gonna
year.
get into that this year,
Yeah, okay.
and we're probably gonna all walk away disturbed, because when I get into the depth of what marriage really means, I mean, there's so many ways we talk about it wrong or
Don't give
understand
it
it.
away.
I'm not going to give it
Don't give it
away.
away.
I'm not going to give it away, but it's important
Mm-hmm.
because it's very important. So so I guess a few more things on how much time we have left. A few minutes. Is anybody familiar with the prayer service for icons? How they're blessed? It's I have it here. I'm not going to go through it all, but there's actually a service where it's the trisagion prayer that we're all used to, and then there's actual service where the icon using holy water is blessed and anointed, or not anointed, but blessed, and so even when we buy an icon and bring it into our home, there's various things we can do, but we should, wherever we place it, we should place it prayerfully with a prayer. Never detach it from prayer. It doesn't have to necessarily be. I mean, the prayer I have in front of me again is really what the priest will do, right? When the priest blesses icons, but that's why sometimes you've probably seen a priest or somebody presented with an icon. They usually cross themselves and kiss the icon. It's a prayer. It's a blessing. It's reminding a reminder of the holiness. You just breathe heavy. Okay, I thought you had a question. Yeah. So there's a couple other things that icon. There's and again, I'm a little out of my depth because I have no artistic ability whatsoever. But I think it's important to kind of teach or talk about what goes into the creation of the icon. There's a perspective of the icon that's called an inverse perspective. Anybody ever heard of that? Inverse perspective in art. If I can find my notes. an inverse perspective, again, it's just a perspective where it's used to draw you into the actual thing you're viewing, right? Again, I guess the only thing really worth sharing about that is because I don't understand it completely. I told my friend Elena, it'd be good if you could be in this class because she's an iconographer. But it's really, again, it's just one more aspect of the icon. It's meant to draw you into it, right? Where your eye gets fixed. So, and really, that's really all I had today in terms of just, some of the background about what goes into icons. Harry, you had a question?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So, any final thoughts, comments,
Can I
questions?
share something?
You may.
Okay. So for years I've heard about this, and this has to do with, believe it, you can disbelieve it, but this is a story that was handed down to me. My grandfather, Nicholas Cletus, and I know that he existed on steamships that crossed the Atlantic. He was a coal tender. He shoveled coal into into those engines, and I can just imagine what a horrible life that was. So in the middle of the Atlantic, the story goes, the ship stopped for no apparent reason. And, the engineers were trying to figure out what was going on, how come they couldn't get the ship to go, and it was stuck there overnight. The sea was perfect as glass, so it could have been the Sargasso Sea for all I know. But there was a loud banging on the hull. Bang, bang, bang. They didn't know what it was, and when dawn came around, the captain sent some of the crew down into maybe one of those little lifeboats and said, find out what's hitting the boat, okay? They found an icon. And it was an icon, and I have a picture of it, I can show you later, called Glycophilusa. I didn't know what the story of the archetype was. So the captain, miraculously, found this icon. He gave it to my grandfather because his sister, she went by the name of Niki. Her original name was Evangelia. She was a nun, and so they brought it to the monastery. And there's a monastery outside of, very close to Athens Airport, and it's called the St. John Prodromos, the Baptist Monastery. There's only 2 people there. It's right next to this giant monastery of St. Sophronios. And so I actually made a pilgrimage there to go see it. I finally saw it just a couple of days ago. And I mean, it was quite a moving experience to see it. The priest of the monastery was not there, but the monk that was there, he told me and my uncle how about a decade ago, there were these raging forest fires, and this monastery is on a little hilltop. But of course, there's mountains all over the place. He said the fires were approaching the monastery, and they were coming up the hill. And Father Germanos, the head of the monastery, he took out the icon and he blessed, he tried to bless her. I'm not sure what to call it, but to protect the monastery from the fire. And he said immediately, gust of wind blew the fire away and saved the monastery. And so I can share photographs of that with you, but I just gazed at that icon for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I mean, it was, I almost imagine that the Christ child, instead of having just pursed lips, started smiling. It was just, again, very emotional and moving. So anyway, I thought that was, I didn't know we were going to talk about icons, but
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Has anybody been in the presence of a mirror streaming icon, seen it for their own 2 eyes and experienced it?
We've had them here a couple of times
Mhm.
also in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, no, I know.
Nice. Yeah.
There's a church up in Pennsylvania. It's funny how a lot of people don't know about it, but they do a service on Wednesdays with a mirror streaming. I mean, it's gushing, and no, but it's something to hear these things and believe them. But it's certainly something else when you actually see them, right? Because we're so conditioned to see it as to believe it, which is never the case. But it's amazing. But go ahead, John.
And there was one that was brought from Moscow, I think,
Yeah.
about 2 years ago to St. John's on 16th Street, and it was a rose-scented mirror. I remember being there to venerate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when I was up at St. Tikhon's Monastery.
Or maybe St. Petersburg, but one of the Russian churches. I'm sorry.
I still have it. The Father Sergius, the Archimandrite, up at the monastery, I took my wife and I back into a really small
Beautiful.
chapel-like room, and prayed. We did a he did a like a little prayer service for us, and he anointed us with the holy oil from Saint Anna, the mother of Theotokos, for her icon that was streaming oil, and he gave me the blessed oil. I still have it at home. So yeah, it's
One last item, if I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we dismiss,
Yeah.
and maybe this was in preparation for one of our church tour activities for the festival here.
Mhm.
I remember reading about this someplace and then using this whenever we did the church tours, that if you notice the icons of Mary with Christ, Christ is never depicted in proper orthodoxy or Orthodox iconography as an infant. He's small in stature, but he has a mature face.
Mhm.
But we don't infantilize Jesus in the Orthodox iconography. Notice it. Just
Yeah.
take a look at it next time. Once you know that, and then you look at every icon, you realize. And Mary is never depicted alone. We venerate Mary because she's the mother of God. We don't venerate her solo.
Right.
Whereas our Catholic brethren have statues of Mary, and she's venerated as an individual, but we never have icons of Mary without Christ.
Yeah, in the complete fabric
Mhm.
of our veneration and our worship, it's always communal. It's never a celebration of an individual outside of the community. And even in the icon of the Nativity, Christ, talk about two different perspectives. The Holy Fathers point out, and teachers will point out, that Christ is wrapped in his burial clothes. So because the birth, the crucifixion, and the resurrection, they're not separate. They're never apart from each other. Things enter into our human consciousness and experience at fixed points of time, but they're eternal truths. That's why in Revelation, I think it was the Lamb of God is slain before the foundation of the world. The crucifixion and the resurrection are an eternal truth. It gets really heady, but the point being is that our human experience, we touch eternity in different times, and this is an ever-present reminder of, and this is why Christ says in John 5, I think 38, 39, the two resurrections, one to life and one to condemnation. We're not going to cease to exist. So that's why we're all given the grace and the opportunity to live in repentance. We're created for repentance, and again, I won't go too far. That's why it's important to understand repentance for what it really is. It's not just a legalistic, it's really a humble way of life where you're continually moving in the direction to become Christ-like. So all this ties together. So, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any final thoughts, questions before we disband? So, all right. For those of you online that listen, thank you for joining. As always, if anybody cares to write comments as they listen throughout the week, I check periodically just to make sure nothing's missed. But we will be back next Sunday, and we will continue along this thread, specific topic to be published later. So have a blessed week, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Take care.